So this is the first video for the second set of slides for Chapter 17, Investigative and Data-Driven Reporting. This is going to start with, this set of videos will start with writing the story and then go on to cover sources. I'll break each section up into its own video. So we're going to start back in with the process of actually writing the story. Once we have done our plan, we've gotten all of our sources, we've gotten all of our information, and we have double checked everything to make sure it's right. How are we going to go about with the writing of the stories? Now, I've alluded to this, but I just want to be clear that most stories that are going to be published either online or in print by any kind of larger organization are going to need to be reviewed, or required to be reviewed by the company's lawyer before they're published, posted online, or broadcast. It helps to know the basics of libel and privacy law so that if there's anything that might be an issue, you can address it before it gets to this point. Now, hopefully the lawyer that's employed by the company is going to be sympathetic to the fact that you have a really important story that you want published. But whether they're sympathetic or not, you might need to argue for why the story needs to go out or should and can go out, regardless of kind of the position that the lawyer takes, because the lawyer may be more conservative and err on the side of making sure that, they don't get dragged into a lawsuit, even if, they know they can win the lawsuit. So you need to be equipped to argue your story, and be sure that you've done your due diligence and can show that you've done your due diligence in your reporting. We go over this in a lot more detail when you take media law and ethics in terms of what is libel. If you're, just as a quick tip, if it's someone who is in the public eye, especially someone who is, a government official, they have to prove that they have like a higher burden of proof. So if something, is true, then it doesn't matter that it damages their reputation. And make sure that, you know the basics of privacy law, that you haven't broken any privacy laws in order to get the information, because unfortunately, if you have good information, but you've broken the law in order to get it, then that can become a real problem for you. And you can, even if it's a really important story and it brings things to light, you could still be held accountable for breaking the law in order to get that information. So obviously that stuff's covered in more depth in a class that's about that, but just making sure that you're aware of these things ahead of time. So you've spent a long time meticulously putting together your argument, checking and cross-checking all of this data. Some of it's probably really boring, going to sources, having them confirm what each other have said. You spent a lot of energy and effort on this. All of that time is going to be wasted if you don't reach your audience and convince them that this matters. So your writing and your ability to craft a really good and compelling story is more important than it ever has been, because you have spent so much of your time, effort, and energy on this, and you know how important it is. So you need to convince others that it is as well. So how are you going to go about making sure that you grab your reader and that you get them the important information as effectively as possible in a way that they're going to care about it? So you need to make sure that you select an effective story structure for your piece. So you know your information better than anybody else. You know what you've got. So make sure that you pick a structure that tells your story in the best possible light. So oftentimes we're going to start with the hard lead. Start with any newly discovered facts you've brought to light. And all of your key findings, make sure they go in that first few paragraphs. It's your standard kind of inverted pyramid. Most important information goes first. And then you want to hit people with what's important so that they get that up front, and then they're compelled to keep reading. There are alternative approaches. We've covered them in chapter 10. You can always go back over them. You've got that handy little chart in your book that shows you different approaches and kind of what they're good for, what they kind of start with and what they focus on. So for example, depending on your edition of the book, there's an example where, you're using the human element in order to engage readers. We can use individuals in order to tell broader stories. That's the focus kind of approach. You can use a chronology approach if you want to lay out a timeline, if that's really important. So just think about the information you have and think about the best way to present it. So you don't want months and years worth of work to be wasted because you picked the wrong format and people got bored. So having selected your story structure and your lead, You want to make sure that you've put proof inside your story that leads credibility to what you've written. You want to know how the story was reported, not just what the facts are. We want to know how you know it. Fake news floats around. Everyone is kind of hyper aware about the credibility of information, credibility of sources. So you want to give people a reason to believe you and to believe your sources. As much as you can fact check, as much as you can show them, it's like when you're doing a math problem, show your work. The more that you show people, the more that they're going to believe you, and the more that your story will gain traction. Now, you know that your story is credible and you've picked the best way to tell your story, but you want to make sure that you try to, as much as you can, give people clear and simple explanations. You've had to do all that hard work, kind of simplifying things in your head. You want to give them the solution and you want to give readers the answer. Now, there's kind of many ways to do this, so I'm going to have a whole slide that's just on that. So you want to draw people into that story. You want to pull them in, and you want to keep it simple. So you've had to do the hard work. You've had to figure out how something works, so you can use the tools available to you in order to kind of simplify things for people. You can kind of call things out and be like, hey, do you need to know what this means? That's in the sidebar. Or here, we're going to link to a source so you can learn a little bit more about things. Tell people what things mean. When you started, you didn't understand why this number was important, but now you do. Tell people, have them understand that. And the way that you're going to be able to think about and lay things out in the clearest way possible is to organize everything before you write. So you've got all these piles of notes. Think about, in fact, go to someone who you haven't talked about this with and tell it to them. And when they stop you and they want you to explain something to them, write that down so you know, okay, when I go to write this story, I need to explain this first, because people, you know it inside out, but people who haven't seen this before don't understand it. So, summarize things, but make sure that people understand what goes behind that summary. Now, the other thing that you can do, especially in something with the investigative reporting, and this goes back to the fact that you want to be objective and not neutral, is that once you have all that information, you can suggest what people could do with it. Again, you've made sure that you're objective and you've covered both sides and you've shown them everything that you can, but then you can say, hey, if it looks like, the president is corrupt, well, here's things we can do in order to make things better. Now, the other thing that we need to keep in mind and to be realistic about is that people are going to be skeptical. Things have changed a lot in the past 5-10 years, and so people want to have access to the documents, to the sources, to the raw footage that you've used in order to get this story across. So if you have access and the ability to show those things, then please do. It's great. It lends credibility. It also engages people because then they feel like they're part of the story. They're part of piecing it together. But overall, if you're fair and that you've kind of displayed your objectivity through your reporting, then people are going to be more likely to actually believe the conclusions that you've drawn, to kind of come out on your side of the story, and hopefully they'll understand the takeaway that you're trying to give them. Now, one last note is that if you can, this kind of goes into the clear, simple explanations. If you can work with people to kind of plan multimedia aspects of the story, or, again, I mentioned you might find that you've got more than one story on your hands by the end of this. You might have a series. If you can plan how you're going to engage with people beyond just print, that's wonderful, and that can really both drive engagement but also make sure that more people see your story and that more people engage with it. You'll get more audiences that way. And again, it's going to build credibility by allowing people access to your data. And the main thing, though, that is kind of the difficulty is that you need to learn, or at least know how to access people who know how to do it, how to tell your story in different formats, because it's different to tell a story online than it is in print. It's different to tell a story on the radio or in a podcast than it is in print. And it's different, again, to tell things on video or in a broadcast environment than it is in print. So if you're really good at one or the other, work with other people who maybe that's their forte, and together you can tell the strongest story possible. Because the big thing is, in the end, you want to make sure that your story, the thing that you have spent so much time and effort on, reaches as many people, but doesn't just like get in front of their faces, but actually like gets into them and have them understand and care about it the way that you care about it.